The world knows Angelina Jolie, an Academy Award-winning actress, a humanitarian, a global icon. For more than 3 decades, millions have followed every chapter of her extraordinary life. Her rise to Hollywood stardom, her humanitarian missions across the globe, her marriage to Brad Pitt, her role as the mother of 6 children. Every triumph, every heartbreak, every headline. But hidden behind one of the most famous women in the world is a man whose story has rarely been told. A man who was there before the fame, before their Academy Award, before the red carpets, before the world even knew the name Angelina Jolie. His name is James Haven. Most people know him only as Angelina's older brother. Some remember him because of a controversial moment at the 2000 Academy Awards. Others may have noticed him standing quietly beside Angelina during difficult periods of her life. And then, he seemed to disappear. No blockbuster career. No endless interviews. No desperate search for fame. In an industry where almost everyone is chasing the spotlight, James Haven appeared to walk away from it. But was that really the whole story? Or did he make a very different choice? Because while the world watched Angelina Jolie become one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces, James remained something far more important. A constant, a protector, a witness to every chapter of her life. He experienced the same difficult childhood. He watched his parents' marriage fall apart. He stood beside their mother through her long battle with illness. He witnessed Angelina's rise from a struggling young actress to an international icon. And through every family crisis, every public controversy, every painful loss, he was still there, not in front of the cameras, but just beyond them. Perhaps James Haven never wanted the world to know his story. Perhaps he understood something that Hollywood often forgets: that not every meaningful life is lived under bright lights. Some of the strongest people are the ones history barely notices. The ones who quietly hold a family together while someone else stands at the center of attention. So who is James Haven? Why did he choose a life away from fame when Hollywood was within his reach? And how did one quiet brother become one of the most important people in Angelina Jolie's life? Tonight, we step away from the spotlight to discover the untold story of the brother who never stopped standing beside his sister. Long before their Academy Awards, long before humanitarian missions, long before the world knew the name Angelina Jolie, there were simply 2 children growing up in a family that looked very different behind closed doors than it did from the outside. James Haven was born on May 11, 1973. 2 years later came his younger sister, Angelina Jolie. To the public, they appeared to be the children of a rising Hollywood actor, Voight, and actress Marcheline Bertrand. It sounded like the beginning of a perfect Hollywood story. But appearances can be deceiving. As James and Angelina were still very young, the marriage between their parents began to unravel. The separation that followed would become the defining moment of their childhood. Instead of growing up in the glamorous world many people imagined, the 2 siblings were raised primarily by their mother, Marcheline Bertrand. Everything changed almost overnight. Marcheline was no longer chasing the Hollywood career she had once dreamed of. Her focus became raising 2 children on her own. For James, childhood changed in another way as well. Although he was only a boy himself, he naturally stepped into the role of an older brother who felt responsible for protecting his younger sister. They shared more than the same home. They shared uncertainty. They shared disappointment. And perhaps most importantly, they shared the quiet determination of a mother who refused to let difficult circumstances define her children. Friends who knew the family often described their household as loving but modest. Despite their connection to Hollywood, fame was never the center of daily life. Marcheline encouraged curiosity, kindness, and creativity far more than celebrity. Movies were simply movies. Character mattered much more. James and Angelina grew up remarkably close. Not because life was easy, but because hardship often strengthens the people who experience it together. While other siblings sometimes drift apart during childhood, James and Angelina seemed to rely on one another in ways only they could truly understand. They knew what it felt like to miss having a traditional family. They knew the emotional weight their mother quietly carried. And they knew that no one outside their home could fully understand what they were living through. As Angelina later developed a bold, fearless personality, James often displayed a quieter presence. He was the loudest person in their room. He was seeking attention. He observed more than he spoke. People who knew him frequently described him as thoughtful, gentle, and deeply loyal. Those qualities would remain with him throughout his life. Their mother also made sure her children understood that success was measured by popularity. She introduced them to books, art, different cultures, and conversations about the world beyond Hollywood. Rather than teaching them how to become famous, she encouraged them to become compassionate human beings. Those lessons left a lasting impression on both children. As teenagers, James and Angelina both developed an interest in filmmaking. They shared creative ambitions and often encouraged each other's artistic ideas. For a while, it even seemed possible that they might one day build careers side by side in the entertainment industry. But even then, there was an important difference between them. Angelina seemed naturally drawn toward the spotlight. James appeared far more comfortable standing just outside it. He enjoyed storytelling. He appreciated filmmaking. Yet he never displayed the same desire to become the center of public attention. Perhaps even at a young age, he understood something many people spend a lifetime trying to learn. Not every meaningful role is played in front of the camera. Some of the most important people are the ones helping others shine. Looking back today, it becomes clear that James Haven's story was never meant to mirror his sister's. They shared the same childhood, the same heartbreak, the same mother, but they carried those experiences in very different ways. Angelina would eventually become one of the most recognizable women on Earth. James would choose a far quieter road. Yet before either path had truly begun, they were simply a brother and sister sitting at the same dinner table, comforting one another through difficult days, and slowly building a bond that fame, distance, and time would never completely break. Because long before the world knew Angelina Jolie, James Haven already knew exactly who she was. And she knew she could always count on him. As James Haven and Angelina Jolie entered adulthood, they shared something few siblings ever experience. They were both standing at the edge of Hollywood. The dream their mother had once pursued now seemed within reach for both of them. Like Angelina, James was drawn to filmmaking. He studied cinema and developed a genuine passion for storytelling, not only as an actor, but also behind the camera. Friends described him as thoughtful, creative, and far more interested in the art of filmmaking than the glamour that often surrounded it. For a time, it looked as though the brother and sister might build successful careers together. James appeared in several independent films and worked on a handful of creative projects. He had the talent, he had the connections, and perhaps most importantly, he had one of Hollywood's fastest rising stars standing beside him. If he had wanted to, James could have built an entire career around being Angelina Jolie's brother. Hollywood has seen that story many times before. Relatives of famous actors often use family connections to stay in the spotlight. Some become celebrities simply because of the name they carry. But James made a very different choice. He rarely gave interviews. He rarely attended celebrity events unless they genuinely mattered to his family. And he never tried to turn Angelina's success into his own public identity. Instead, while Angelina's career accelerated with films like Gia, Girl, Interrupted, Lara Croft, Tomb Raider, and later Mr. and Mrs. James quietly became one of the few people she could completely trust. As Angelina's fame exploded, so did the pressure surrounding her life. Every relationship became front-page news. Every decision was analyzed. Every mistake was magnified before millions of people. For most celebrities, finding someone who remembers who they were before fame becomes increasingly difficult. For Angelina, James was that person. He remembered the little girl who grew up sharing difficult days with him and their mother. He remembered the family before magazine covers and red carpets. He remembered a time when success wasn't measured by awards but by simply getting through another day together. Perhaps that history explains why the bond between them always appeared unusually strong. One moment, in particular, captured worldwide attention. At the 2000 Academy Awards, Angelina Jolie won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress for her unforgettable performance in Girl, Interrupted. Standing on stage, visibly emotional, she thanked many people. But one statement instantly became international news. She looked toward James and said, "I'm so in love with my brother right now." Later that evening, photographers captured the siblings sharing a kiss while celebrating the biggest night of Angelina's career. Within hours, tabloids around the world transformed those images into sensational headlines. Speculation spread rapidly. Rumors replaced reality. The relationship between two siblings became one of the most misunderstood celebrity stories of that era. Years later, both Angelina and James explained that the moment had been completely innocent, a deeply emotional celebration shared between a brother and sister who had endured years of hardship together. To them, it reflected relief, pride, gratitude. To the media, however, it became something entirely different. It was one of the first painful lessons James experienced about life connected to global celebrity. He had not sought attention, yet attention found him anyway. Unlike many people who might have defended themselves through endless interviews or public statements, James chose silence. He stepped back. He refused to fuel the headlines. Rather than fighting for space in front of the cameras, he quietly returned to the life he preferred. That decision revealed something important about his character. James never seemed interested in winning public opinion. He was interested in protecting the people he loved, even if it meant allowing the world to misunderstand him. As Angelina's fame continued reaching extraordinary heights, James remained exactly where he had always been. Not competing, not seeking recognition, not asking for applause, simply standing beside his sister whenever she needed someone who knew her long before Hollywood did. Looking back now, it becomes clear that Hollywood offered James Haven an opportunity many people spend their entire lives chasing. Recognition, visibility, celebrity. He could have accepted all of it. Instead, he chose something he believed mattered more: family, and that choice would become even more important as the Jolie family prepared to face the greatest loss they had ever experienced. For many families, life is measured by birthdays, graduations, weddings, moments of celebration. But for the Jolie family, some of the most defining moments came through loss, heartbreak, and unimaginable public pressure. And during every one of those moments, James Haven was there, not as the center of attention, not as the family spokesperson, but as the quiet presence who rarely left his sister's side. If there was one person who truly understood what Angelina was carrying, it was James, because he had lived every chapter with her. They had shared the same childhood, the same parents, the same painful divorce, the same determination to protect the woman who had sacrificed everything for them, their mother, Marcheline Bertrand. As Marcheline's battle with ovarian cancer became increasingly difficult, both of her children devoted as much time as possible to being with her. For James, this was simply about caring for a sick parent. It was about standing beside the woman who had spent her entire life standing beside him. Friends close to The family later described those final years as deeply emotional but remarkably private. There were no cameras, no publicity, no attempts to turn personal pain into public sympathy. The family protected Marcheline's dignity until the very end. When she passed away in January 2007, the loss devastated both siblings. For Angelina, it felt as though she had lost her greatest source of guidance. For James, it meant saying goodbye to the person who had shaped nearly every part of his life. In many ways, the death of their mother brought the brother and sister even closer together. They no longer shared only memories. They now shared the responsibility of carrying her legacy forward. During those difficult years, James became one of the few people Angelina could lean on without explanation. He never needed headlines to understand what she was feeling. He had lived the same heartbreak. Around the same time, another relationship within the family slowly began to change. For years, both James and Angelina had experienced periods of distance from their father, John Voight. Their relationship had been complicated, marked by misunderstandings, emotional wounds, and long stretches of separation. But time has a way of softening even the deepest divisions. As the years passed, both siblings gradually rebuilt a relationship with their father. It was a dramatic Hollywood reconciliation. There were no grand public declarations. Instead, it happened quietly. Conversation by conversation. Visit by visit. Step by step. James approached that reconciliation in the same way he approached almost everything else in life, without seeking attention, without asking for credit. His goal was never to rewrite the past. It was simply to preserve what family remained. Then another chapter began. Angelina became a mother. Not once, but 6 times. As her family grew, so did her responsibilities. International filming schedules, humanitarian missions, school activities, medical appointments. Life became increasingly demanding. Once again, James quietly stepped into a role that few people outside the family ever noticed. Rather than becoming another celebrity relative making headlines, he became a trusted uncle. Reports over the years suggested that James often spent time with his nieces and nephews, helping care for them while Angelina traveled for work or humanitarian missions. Whether attending family gatherings or simply being available when needed, he offered something every child deserves: consistency. For the Jolie children, Uncle James was a public figure. He was simply family. A calm, familiar presence in a life that often attracted extraordinary public attention. That role reflected something much larger than babysitting or family obligation. It reflected loyalty. The kind of loyalty that doesn't ask for recognition. The kind that quietly shows up whenever someone needs help. Hollywood often celebrates dramatic acts of heroism. But real loyalty rarely looks dramatic. Sometimes, it looks like answering the phone in the middle of the night. Sometimes, it means sitting beside someone during their worst days without saying very much at all. And sometimes, it means remaining close to the people you love, even when the rest of the world has stopped paying attention. As Angelina's highly publicized separation from Brad Pitt unfolded, media coverage once again surrounded every aspect of the family's private life. Speculation became constant. Rumors spread daily. The public searched for villains and heroes. James, however, remained exactly who he had always been. He didn't hold press conferences. He didn't write memoirs. He didn't use family pain to build a public image. He simply continued doing what he had done since childhood. Being there. Perhaps that is why James Haven's story is so unusual in Hollywood. He never became famous for what he achieved alone. He became unforgettable because of something much rarer: his unwavering loyalty to the people he loved. In an industry where relationships often fade as quickly as headlines, James Haven remained constant. Not because anyone expected him to, but because, For him, family was never a headline. It was a lifelong commitment. And that commitment would ultimately shape one final decision. A decision to step even farther away from Hollywood's spotlight and embrace a life very few celebrities ever choose. Hollywood has a way of convincing people that success only exists under bright lights. That the more famous you become, the more meaningful your life must be. James Haven spent much of his early adulthood close enough to touch that world. He attended premieres. He walked red carpets. He worked on film projects. He knew actors, directors, and producers. He understood exactly how Hollywood operated. And perhaps that is precisely why he made a decision that surprised so many people. He chose to walk away. Unlike countless celebrity relatives who build entire careers from family connections, James gradually stepped back from public life. There was no dramatic farewell. No announcement that he was leaving Hollywood forever. He simply became less visible, fewer interviews, fewer public appearances, fewer photographs, until eventually people began asking the same question. Whatever happened to James Haven, the answer was surprisingly simple. Nothing happened. He simply stopped chasing their attention everyone else seemed desperate to find. While social media transformed celebrities into 24-hour public figures, James remained almost entirely absent from the online world. He never appeared interested in building a personal brand. He didn't launch podcasts. He didn't publish books about growing up with Angelina Jolie. He didn't sell exclusive interviews revealing family secrets. In an era where privacy had become one of the rarest luxuries, James quietly chose to protect his. For many people, that decision seemed almost impossible to understand. Why walk away from opportunities that millions of people dream about? Why disappear when your last name could open almost any door in Hollywood? Perhaps because James measured success differently. Those who have worked with him over the years often describe someone who genuinely loved filmmaking. Not celebrity. There is an important difference. One is about creating meaningful stories. The other is about constantly being seen. James appeared far more interested in the first. He occasionally continued working behind the scenes, exploring directing, producing, and independent creative projects. These were never the kinds of projects designed to dominate entertainment headlines. They reflected someone who still loved the craft, even if he no longer cared about the spotlight surrounding it. That quiet approach mirrored the example he had watched throughout his childhood. His mother, Marcheline Bertrand, had also stepped away from the career she once imagined. Not because she lacked talent, but because she chose a different definition of fulfillment. James seemed to inherit that same perspective. He understood that fulfillment and fame are not always the same thing. Perhaps one of the greatest misconceptions about Hollywood is the belief that everyone wants to become famous. Some people simply want meaningful work, a peaceful life, strong relationships, the freedom to wake up each morning without wondering what strangers are saying about them online. By every indication, James found value in those quieter things. There was another reason his decision mattered. Walking away from public attention also meant protecting the people he loved. Every interview he refused, every headline he declined, every private family moment he kept out of the media, helped preserve a small piece of normal life for a family that had spent decades living under extraordinary public scrutiny. He never appeared interested in correcting every rumor. He never seemed determined to convince the world that it misunderstood him. That kind of restraint is increasingly rare. Today, many public figures feel compelled to respond immediately to criticism. James chose silence, not because he had nothing to say, but because he believed not everything needed to be said publicly. There is a quiet confidence in people who no longer need strangers' approval. James Haven seems to embody that confidence. His life reminds us that there are two very different kinds of success. One is measured by headlines, awards, followers, and public recognition. The other is measured by peace of mind, loyalty, integrity, and the trust of the people closest to you. Hollywood celebrates the first kind almost every day. James Haven appears to have spent his life pursuing the second. Perhaps that is why, after all these years, he remains one of the most intriguing figures connected to one of Hollywood's most famous families. Not because of what he revealed to the world, but because of everything he quietly chose to keep for himself. Sometimes walking away isn't a sign of failure. Sometimes it is the clearest sign that someone finally knows exactly who they are. And in James Haven's case, that quiet certainty may have become his greatest achievement of all. In Hollywood, people often spend their entire lives chasing recognition. They dream of hearing their names announced at award ceremonies, seeing their faces on movie posters, reading headlines writ about them. For many, fame becomes the destination. But James Haven chose a different path. And perhaps that is why his story feels so unusual. When people think about the Jolie family, they naturally remember Angelina. They remember their Academy Award, the humanitarian work, the global fame. Few people stop to ask about the man who quietly stood beside so many of those moments. Not because he demanded attention, but because he never did. Throughout his life, James remained remarkably consistent. He never tried to reinvent himself for the public. He never turned private family moments into profitable stories. He never built a career by exposing the people closest to him. In an era when celebrity families often become brands, James chose something almost unheard of. He protected his family's privacy. That choice may never earn him an award, but it earned something far more meaningful: trust. Imagine what James has witnessed over the course of his life. He watched his younger sister struggle to find confidence as a teenager. He celebrated as she became one of the most respected actresses of her generation. He stood beside his mother through her final years. He mourned her loss. He witnessed Angelina build an international family filled with children from different cultures and backgrounds. He saw their extraordinary highs and the deeply painful lows. Through marriages, divorces, health battles, media storms, and endless public speculation. Yet through every chapter, one thing remained remarkably unchanged. James stayed. He was the loudest voice. He was the public defender. He was searching for recognition. He simply remained present. Sometimes, the strongest people in a family aren't the ones leading from the front. They are the ones standing quietly behind everyone else, making sure no one has to face life's hardest moments alone. That kind of strength rarely makes headlines, but it changes lives. Perhaps that is James Haven's greatest legacy. Not the films he appeared in, not the projects he directed, not the famous surname he carries. His legacy is loyalty. The quiet, unwavering kind that doesn't disappear when life becomes difficult. As years passed, Angelina herself often spoke about the importance of surrounding her children with people they could trust. People who loved them without expecting anything in return. James became one of those people. Not because the world appointed him to that role, but because he chose it. It is easy to admire celebrities when everything is going well. It is much harder to remain beside someone when the cameras have moved on. James did exactly that. Again, and again, and again. Looking back, it becomes clear that James Haven never really walked away from Hollywood because he couldn't succeed there. He walked away because success meant something different to him. For some people, success is measured by applause. For others, it is measured by peace. For some, it is found in standing at the center of attention. For others, it is found in knowing the people they love can always count on them. James chose the second path. And perhaps that choice tells us more about his character than any blockbuster movie ever could. history will almost certainly remember Angelina Jolie. Her name has already become part of Hollywood history. But behind one of the world's most recognizable women stood someone whose influence cannot be measured by magazine covers or awards. A brother who never asked to become famous. A brother who never tried to compete. A brother who quietly carried the same family memories, the same heartbreak, and the same hopes for the future. Not every hero stands on a stage. Not every meaningful life becomes a headline. Sometimes, the greatest act of love is simply remaining present when everyone else is looking somewhere else. Perhaps that is why James Haven's story deserves to be told. Because in a world that celebrates those who seek the spotlight, he reminds us of the extraordinary strength of those who never needed it. And maybe that is the role he was always meant to play. The brother history almost overlooked. But the family never could.